In the American West, there were outlaws such as Jesse James, Billy the Kid, and Belle Starr, among many others. None of those bad men and women could match the man we're going to tell you about today, though. Hello, folks. I'm Steve Gilley, along with Rod Mullins, with another one of the stories of Appalachia.
Well, Steve, you mentioned a couple of names there. Jesse James, didn't mention Frank, but you also mentioned Belle Starr. So I first thought you might be talking about one of my relatives, but that's a story for another day. Who are we getting ready to talk about today that had dealings with these outlaws?
Geez, Rod, I don't know. Maybe we ought to just let you talk. It sounds like you got a story inside you.
I don't know how much of it is made up, how much of it is really just innuendo and story. But I wouldn't put a fake $3 bill on the chance of that, and see if that would work.
Okay, well, we'll stick with what we got here today. Now, this fella is a very fascinating kind of guy. He came out of Kentucky and ended up becoming famous out west for, well, you'll find out how he got famous out west here in just a few minutes.
I've got a feeling, but I'm not going to say anything, so let's go.
Yeah, the fellow we're talking about is named Boone Helm. And Boone was born in Lincoln County, Kentucky, January 28th, 1828, into the hardworking, respectable family of Joseph and Nancy Helm. As he grew to adulthood, though, it was apparent that the words hardworking and respectable were not terms that applied to him. You see, Helm grew into a teen who loved to demonstrate his strength and agility by goading men into fights. He also became quite the horseman, learning how to throw his knife from horseback, then retrieve it from the ground while at full gallop. He also developed a deep dislike and contempt for the law, as evidenced by a notorious incident.
Deep dislike and contempt for the law. Still sounds like we're talking about a relative of mine, Steve. Anyway, Helm had gotten into trouble with the law in Lincoln County and was arrested by the sheriff. Well, it might be better to say that the sheriff attempted to arrest Boone, because as soon as he did so, Boone Helm promptly took off on his horse, which he rode up the courthouse steps into the courtroom while court was in session. There, he cussed out the presiding judge. You talk about somebody having some, gumption about him. Well, Helm married in 1848 to a girl named Lucinda. Now, the two had a daughter, but marriage and fatherhood did nothing to settle him down at all. He got into the habit of getting rip-roaring drunk and riding his horse into the family home at full gallop. Still sounds like one of my relatives, Steve. Gosh, this is scary. Then dismounting, where he proceeded to, unfortunately, beat up Lucinda.
Something about this horse that figures prominently in this story, and it's going to go on a little bit more than this, too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, things got so bad between the couple that Lucinda finally filed for divorce, with Joseph Helm, her father-in-law, that's Boone's father, actually paying the lawyer and the court fees to end the marriage. The cost of litigation and fees for the divorce nearly bankrupted the elder Helm and destroyed any hope of a relationship between the family and Boone. So the newly single man decided that Kentucky was not the place for him. He felt that he was better suited for the Wild West. So he mounted that horse of his and headed out to California to get in on the gold rush that was then in full swing out there. He didn't want to go alone, though, so he asked his cousin, Little Barry Shute, to join him. Well, Shute initially agreed, but as the time came to leave, he changed his mind about the wisdom of going west with his crazy cousin, first to Texas, then on to California. The problem for Little Barry was telling that to Boone. Well, he hemmed and hawed about whether he ought to go, leading Boone Helm to come right out and ask him.
So, Little Barry, you back down on the Texas question, have you?
Shute tried to explain why he didn't want to go west with him, but Boone was having none of it, demanding that he cut to the chase and tell him yes or no, are you going? Well, when Little Barry told his cousin no, Helm did not take it well, did he, Rod?
Boone Helm pulled out his knife and he plunged the knife into Shute's chest, killing him. He then promptly mounted his horse and swiftly made his way west. Well, right behind him were Shute's brother and his friends, who pursued Helm to an Indian reservation where they captured him and brought him back to Lincoln County to stand trial for murder. He was tried and convicted of the murder of Little Barry Shute and placed in jail. His antics while he was held there, though, gained him some attention, enough so that he was brought back before the judge for a hearing on his competency. That judge ruled that Boone Helm's manner was
not only unbecoming, but unbalanced.
Well, Helm was sent to an institution for the mentally deranged, and I'd say that's probably putting it very lightly too, Steve, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say so. Well, when he got to that institute, though, he got the confidence of his guard, who allowed Helm to take walks in the woods on the grounds of the institution by himself. On one of those walks, Boone just kept on walking instead of returning to the facility all the way to California. Well, not literally, just to the horse that was going to take him to the Golden State. On the way, Boone Helm left a trail of robberies and murders. He managed to kill several men in various fights in his travels west, eventually committing premeditated murder, which, as you can imagine, didn't exactly make him welcome. Helm took off to avoid arrest and vigilante justice, and on the way he managed to team up with 6 other men. Helm confided in his new associates that in his past he had eaten all or part of his murder victims.
Oh.
In Helm's words,
I've killed one time or another, and the time has been that I've been obliged to feed on some of them.
This boast is the first report of cannibalism on the part of Boone Helm. There you go, Rod.
Let's re-emphasize that sound effect again. Oh! Okay. Among the folks who had contact with Boone Helm was none other than John Wesley Powell, famous Western explorer and naturalist, who told in his diary of an encounter with the outlaw he'd had on April 10th, 1859. He told of being awakened from his sleep by a man outside demanding to know who owned the lodge Powell was in. Kind of crazy, but when the explorer opened the door, he came face to face with
a tall, cadaverous, sunken-eyed man standing over me, dressed in a dirty, dilapidated coat and shirt and drawers and moccasins so worn that they could scarcely be tied to his feet.
Whoa. Well, Boone went on to describe how he got into Powell's camp along the Snake River in what we know now as Idaho, a harrowing trip that includes how Helm had eaten his companion, who had supposedly committed suicide before getting back to civilization in Salt Lake City, Utah. So
now, Rod, I have to interject here. I didn't put this in here, but I will tell you what he did. Boone, needing something to eat because they were just out in the middle of nowhere, far from civilization, removed his leg and cooked it.
Ew. I'm sorry. This is kind of getting gross here.
He then took what was left of that leg as he headed into civilization, which happened to be Salt Lake City, Utah. I think I've made you speechless for the first time.
I guess he went to Salt Lake City, Utah to get a little bit of salt for his meat to preserve it.
I'm not going to say nothing.
Okay, well, I've got one more thing to read about this, okay?
You go right ahead.
Okay. Well, Helm was driven out of Salt Lake City for his misdeeds, which appear to have included the murder of 2 residents of the city in cold blood. Boone Helm left Powell's camp the next day.
And I'm sure Mr. Powell was glad to see him go.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he finally made it to his original destination of California, where he continued his murderous ways. He killed a rancher who'd befriended him after taking Helm in for protection from the law for other crimes he committed. After that, Boone Helm left for Oregon, robbing people, then murdering them. In 1862, a very drunk Boone Helm gunned down an unarmed man named Dutch Fred in a saloon and took off. While on the run for the murder of Dutch Fred, Helm killed and ate another fugitive who made the mistake of joining up with him. He was captured by the law and put in jail. From there, Boone contacted his brother, Tex Helm, for help, or Old Tex as they called him. Well, Old Tex agreed to help his brother by paying off all the witnesses at great financial cost, leaving the state with no evidence to convict him. And Boone Helm was once again a free man. He and Tex left for Texas, of course, where Boone again took to robbing, killing, and, yes, eating people all across the western frontier.
The end came for Boone when he hooked up with another notorious outlaw, Henry Plummer, in Montana. He was with 4 members of the Plummer gang when they were captured by a group of Montana vigilantes who tried the 5 men in secret, convicted them of various heinous crimes. Well, at the trial, Boone kissed a Bible and proceeded to perjure himself. As he fingered one of his companions, 3-fingered Jack Garner, no pun intended there, folks, a Plummer gang member for the crimes that Helm had committed. The vigilantes convicted Boone Helm anyway.
He was hanged along with his compatriots in Virginia City, Montana on January 14, 1864. But Boone Helm was defiant to the end. As he and the others stood on the gallows before a crowd of 6,000, Helm turned to the man next to him named Gallagher and told him,
"Kick away, old fella. My turn's next. I'll be in hell with you in a minute."
When it was his turn, Helm exclaimed,
"Every man for his principles. Hooray for Jeff Davis. Let her rip."
He then proceeded to jump off the hangman's box before it could be kicked away, and thus ended the life of the Kentucky Cannibal.
Wow.
Bet you wished we talked about your relative, don't you?
Might have been good idea and stuff. Gosh. Well, this also just tells me something, too. Mm-hmm. That my relative, if it was true, he ran with some very, very, very bad people. Any way you look at it.
As bad as Boone Helm?
Not quite that bad, but on a scale of 1 to 10, we would probably say somewhere in about a 3 is probably what he was. Boone Helm was probably about a 10 plus plus. That's the way we would probably rule him, I guess.
You know, the only people, well, bad people in Appalachia that I can even compare this guy to would be the Harps.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I don't even think the Harps ate people. They killed people, killed bunches of people horribly. Yeah, this guy just decided he was, well, he's just going to eat people.
Well, in one way, we got to look at it from another standpoint, too. And I'm trying to be, devil's advocate here. You said it earlier in the podcast. He's out in the middle of nowhere. He's trying to stay away from being caught, different things. Yeah, I'm not saying that he was right in what he did, but, you got to do what you got to do. And if you're going to go and you're going to break down and you're one of these that you're a meat eater and that's what you want, you're going to kill to get you some meat is what you're going to do out of it. As gross as it may sound. I mean, he could have probably lived on other things out in the wilderness if he had just looked. But like we said earlier in the podcast, he was pretty sorry from the way that they talked. He was not one of these people that liked to work. So I guess we could take it that he wanted everything handed to him on a silver platter, so to speak. Ha! There's you another pun in there, Steve. So,
oh my goodness! I think it's time to end this thing, don't you?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Folks, that's the story of Boone Helm, the notorious Kentucky Cannibal. Another one of the stories of Appalachia. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the Stories Podcast on your favorite podcast app. Now, if you're catching this episode on our YouTube channel, go on down below, click that subscribe button. Then, if you don't mind, give us a thumbs up too. We're on YouTube and TikTok at Stories of Appalachia and on Instagram at Story Appalachia. We release short videos telling the stories of this place we call home. Be sure to check us out. Until next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everyone.